The Pianist was rejected by the orchestra, but a garbage collector changed her fate. Abigail Peterson rushed out the doors of the Metropolitan Opera House in New York City, her eyes swollen with tears. The words of conductor Richard Harrington echoed in her mind like knife wounds. She simply didn't have the right fit for the city's symphony orchestra, even though everyone acknowledged her flawless piano technique. Sitting on the steps of the theater's side alley, Abigail couldn't stop crying. 3 years at the conservatory, countless hours of practice, perfect performances at smaller auditions, it all seemed for nothing. Her hands trembled as she clutched the sheet music for Chopin, the piece she had just played. Then she heard a deep, melodious voice humming the very same piece she had performed. She looked up and saw a middle-aged black man in an orange sanitation worker's uniform who had paused his collection route and was watching her with a kind smile. His hair was tied in short dreadlocks, and his eyes held a wisdom that contrasted with the simplicity of his job. "Sorry to bother you, miss," he said, stepping closer slowly, "but I heard your music inside. It was too beautiful." Abigail quickly wiped her face, unsure how to respond. "You were in the theater?" "Not exactly," he replied, pointing to a small ventilation grate on the side of the building. "I've worked around here for 15 years. Every night when I come by to collect the trash, I hear the music that comes through there. I've memorized quite a few pieces." The young woman stared at him in disbelief. How could a garbage man know classical music? "My name is Marcus Johnson, but everyone calls me Mark," he continued, extending a grease-stained hand. "And from the way you stormed out, I'm guessing the audition didn't go well." Abigail hesitated before shaking his hand. "Abigail Peterson. And no, it didn't go well at all. In fact, it was a disaster. Can I ask what happened?" Something in his voice put her at ease. Maybe it was because he was a complete stranger, someone outside the musical world where she had just been rejected. "The conductor said my technique was perfect, but that I didn't have the," she made air quotes with her fingers, "right fit for the orchestra. He said some environments demand more than just talent." Marcus shook his head, a look of disgust crossing his face. "I see. And let me guess, all the other musicians in the orchestra have important last names, went to expensive schools, and come from old money families in the city. How did you know?" "Because I hear their conversations when they leave. Always talking about who knows who, parties in mansions, trips to Europe. Never once heard them talk about real music." Abigail felt a tightness in her chest. That was exactly it. "My family is from the countryside. My parents worked their whole lives in a shoe factory in Rochester to pay for my piano lessons. They saved every penny so I could study at the conservatory here in the city." "And I bet you play better than anyone in there," Marcus said with conviction. "I don't know if that matters. It seems talent isn't enough if you weren't born in the right place." Marcus was silent for a moment, watching the street. Then he pulled an old, worn, golden key from his pocket. "Abigail, can I show you something? Something that might change how you see all this?" She stared at the key, intrigued. "What is it?" "An inheritance from my father. He worked in this theater for over 30 years as a custodian. This key opens a special place, one where music was once free from prejudice." Curiosity overcame Abigail's hesitation. "What place?" "Come with me. But first I need to finish my route. Would you walk with me while we talk?" "I don't like leaving work half done." Abigail glanced at the clock. It was almost 10 at night, and she had nowhere to go. Her student dorm was on the other side of the city, and the last subway wouldn't arrive for another hour. "It's fine," she said, standing up and smoothing the white dress she'd worn for the audition. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now back to the story." As Marcus pushed his trash cart through the streets of the historic district, Abigail walked beside him. The contrast between them was striking. She, a young woman of 22 in her elegant dress and blonde hair pinned in an elaborate bun, and he, a 45-year-old man in a work uniform, his hands calloused from daily labor. "My father started working here in 1960, Marcus said, as he collected trash bags from the businesses. Back then the theater was very different. There were performances for all kinds of people, not just the elite. What changed? Politics, money, prejudice, the usual things. In the 70s, the administration decided the theatre needed more prestige. They started selecting not just the artists, but also the audience. Abigail listened, fascinated, as Marcus worked efficiently, clearly knowing every corner of the area. And what does this have to do with me? You'll understand when you see what this key opens. My father told me stories that were never written in the theatre's history books. They walked for another 40 minutes, Marcus finishing his route while Abigail absorbed every word of his stories about the theatre and the artists who had passed through over the years. She was amazed by his knowledge of music, composers, and even technical details about acoustics. "How did you learn all this?" she asked, when they stopped at the back of the theatre. "My father. He may not have studied at a conservatory, but he loved music more than anything. He spent years listening to rehearsals, talking to musicians, reading about composers at the public library. He taught me everything he knew." Marcus stored his cart in a small cleaning staff storage room and motioned for Abigail to follow. They circled the theatre until they reached a nearly invisible side door, painted the same color as the wall. "Here," he said, inserting the golden key into the old lock. The door creaked open, the sound echoing down the dark hallway. Marcus turned on a small flashlight from his pocket. "Watch your step. The stairs are a bit uneven." Abigail followed him down a narrow staircase leading to the theatre's basement. The air was stuffy, smelling of old wood and dampness. When they reached the bottom, Marcus felt along the wall for a switch. "Get ready," he said, before flipping the lights on. Abigail gasped. Before her was a spacious basement with high ceilings, adorned with carved wooden panels and dusty antique chandeliers. In the center stood a small stage, and on it a black grand piano that, despite its age and neglect, retained a majestic elegance. "My God," she whispered, stepping slowly toward the instrument. "What is this place?" "The Community Music Hall," Marcus answered with pride in his voice. "It operated from 1925 to 1978. This is where artists who weren't accepted upstairs performed. Immigrants, black folks, poor people who had talent but no family name." Abigail stepped onto the small stage and gently pressed the piano keys. To her surprise, though out of tune, the instrument still worked. Why did they close it? Officially? Building renovations. Unofficially? Because it bothered them too much to have two different audiences in the same building. The elite didn't like sharing space, even if it was on separate floors. She ran her fingers over the keys, producing a simple melody that echoed through the empty room. The acoustics were surprisingly good. And no one ever tried to reopen it? They did, a few times, but there were always bureaucratic issues, lack of funding, problems with historic preservation. The truth is, some people prefer this place to stay forgotten. Abigail sat on the piano bench, and even without sheet music, began playing from memory the same Chopin piece she had performed at the audition. The music took on a different depth in that space, as if the walls held the memory of every performance that had ever happened there. "It's incredible," she said when she finished. "The music sounds completely different here." "Because here it's free," Marcus replied, sitting in one of the old audience chairs. "No judgment, no prejudice, just music." Abigail stayed at the piano for a few more minutes, improvising melodies and feeling more connected to her art than she had in years. "Marcus, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why did you do this? Why bring me here? You don't even know me." Marcus sighed and stood, walking to a dusty shelf in the corner of the stage. "Because I saw in you the same passion I saw in someone very special to me, someone who was also rejected up there for not having the right profile." He pulled an old folder from the shelf and opened it, revealing dozens of handwritten sheet music, yellowed with time. "Whose compositions are these?" "Someone who played this same piano 50 years ago, someone who wrote some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard, but never got the chance to see it performed by a professional orchestra." Abigail stepped closer and examined the sheet music. The handwriting was delicate and feminine, and the compositions showed impressive complexity. "She was incredibly talented," Abigail remarked, studying one of the pieces. "She was my grandmother," Marcus said softly. Abigail looked up, surprised. Your grandmother was a composer? Ruby Williams. She came from Jamaica when she was 16, fleeing poverty. She taught herself piano by listening to music on the streets and practicing on broken instruments she found. When they discovered her talent, she tried to audition for the city's orchestras. What happened? The same thing that happened to you today. They said she had talent but not the right profile. Back then, being a woman, black, and an immigrant was a triple barrier no one could break. Marcus turned the pages of the sheet music with reverent care. So she started performing down here. For 15 years, this stage was the only place her music could be heard. She composed over 200 pieces, all kept in this folder. Abigail felt a lump in her throat. Marcus's grandmother's story echoed her own experience in a way that moved her deeply. Did she ever get to hear any of her compositions played professionally? Never. She passed in 1995 at 73, working as a housekeeper. In her free time, she kept composing and playing down here. My father inherited the keys and kept the place preserved. When he passed 5 years ago, he gave me the responsibility. Why didn't you ever try to share her work? I did, a few times. I took the sheet music to musicians, critics, conservatory professors. They all said it was interesting but lacked commercial appeal or historical relevance. Abigail held one of the sheets up to the dim light. The composition was intricate, blending African and European influences into something entirely unique. Marcus, these compositions are extraordinary. Your grandmother was a genius. I know, but that doesn't seem to matter to the people who decide what legitimate art is in this city. She sat down at the piano again and tried to play one of the simplest pieces from the folder. Even with her technical limitations in reading handwritten sheet music, she managed to grasp the essence of the piece. It was deeply emotional, telling a story of longing, hope, and resilience. "This is absolutely beautiful," she said, her voice trembling. "That's exactly what I thought when I heard you playing upstairs. Your music has the same soul as my grandmother's, the same truth." Abigail played late into the night, alternating between Ruby's compositions and her own interpretations of the classics. Marcus stayed in the audience, sometimes humming softly, sometimes just listening in silence. When they finally left the basement, it was past midnight. "Abigail," Marcus said as he locked the door, "can I make you an offer?" "What kind of offer?" "Come back here tomorrow night. Bring your own sheet music. Study my grandmother's compositions. Play as much as you like. This place needs music again." "But is it allowed? Won't we get in trouble?" "Technically, this space is part of the Metropolitan Opera House complex. It's public property, and I have permission to be here as the building's maintenance supervisor." Abigail hesitated. The offer was tempting, but also risky. "I don't know if it's a good idea. What if someone finds out?" "Who's going to find out? This place has been abandoned for decades. Even the administration doesn't know it still exists." "I need to think about it." "Of course. But Abigail, can I tell you something? Today, when I saw you leaving that theater in tears, it reminded me of my grandmother the last time I saw her. She was sitting at this very piano bench, playing a sad song she had written about dreams that never came true. I promised myself that day that if I ever met someone with the same talent and determination she had, I'd give them the chance she never got." Marcus's words struck Abigail deeply. She looked back at the door hiding that forgotten musical treasure. "All right," she finally said. "I'll come back tomorrow." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, continuing. The next day, Abigail spent hours thinking about her conversation with Marcus and the community music hall. During her classes at the conservatory, she couldn't focus completely. Her teacher, Margaret Thompson, a 65-year-old woman who had been her mentor for the past 3 years, noticed her distraction. "Abigail, dear, are you all right? You seem like you're in another world today." "Miss Margaret, can I ask you something about the history of the Metropolitan Opera House?" "Of course, child. What do you want to know?" "Do you know if there was a smaller theater inside the building? Something like a space for alternative performances?" Margaret paused for a moment, as if an old memory had been stirred. "Why that particular question?" Abigail told her about her audition experience and meeting Marcus, leaving out only the details about the key and the basement access. "Oh yes," Margaret said with a nostalgic sigh. "The community music hall. I attended a few performances there when I was young, back in the 70s. So it really did exist? It existed, and it was wonderful. It was where I first heard Afro-Caribbean music blended with European classics in a way I'd never heard before. There was a composer, what was her name? Ruby Williams, an extraordinary woman." Abigail's heart raced. "You knew Ruby Williams?" "Not personally, but I saw several of her performances. She was revolutionary for her time. Her compositions connected European classical tradition with African roots in a way that was completely unique. Unfortunately, she never got the recognition she deserved. What happened to her? What happened to many talented artists who didn't fit the standards accepted by society at the time? She was forgotten. It's a shame because her music was truly special." Abigail left class even more determined to return to the basement that night. The fact that her teacher knew and admired Ruby's work confirmed what she had felt while playing those scores. They were genuine works of art that deserved to be heard. That evening, she met Marcus at the same spot where they had first met. He was waiting for her with a warm smile and a bag in his hands. "I brought a few things," he said as they went down to the basement. "Rags for cleaning, oil for the piano hinges, and even some candles to improve the lighting. You really want this to work, don't you?" "Abigail, for 15 years, I've walked past this theater every day. 15 years watching those people upstairs dismiss anything that doesn't come from their social circle. 15 years keeping my grandmother's compositions and dreaming of the day someone would play them again." When the basement lights flickered on, Abigail saw that Marcus had spent the day tidying the space. The piano was clean, the chairs arranged, and there were even some wildflowers in an improvised vase on the stage. "Marcus, you didn't have to do all this. I wanted you to feel welcome. This place was built for artists, not to sit empty." Abigail spent the next 3 hours immersed in Ruby's compositions. Each piece she played revealed new layers of complexity and emotion. Marcus helped her decipher the handwritten scores, having grown up reading his grandmother's handwriting. "This one," he said, pointing to a particularly elaborate composition. She called it "Longing from Across the Sea." It was the first piece she wrote when she arrived in the United States. Abigail played it slowly, feeling each note carry the weight of a young immigrant's experience in a foreign land. The music began melancholic, shifted to timid hope, and ended with powerful determination. It's like she was telling her own story through the notes. That's exactly what she did. Every composition was a piece of her life, her struggles, her dreams. When Abigail finished playing, they sat in silence for a few minutes. The music still seemed to echo off the old walls. "Marcus, I have a crazy idea." "Go on." "What if we organized a performance here? Nothing big, just a few people. To showcase your grandmother's work." Marcus looked at her in surprise. "You're serious?" "Completely serious. These compositions need to be heard, and this place needs music again." "But how? Who would come? What if they find out?" "We can start small. A few classmates from the conservatory, maybe. People who truly understand music and aren't bound by the prejudices of the cultural elite." The idea excited Marcus, but he still had reservations. "Abigail, this could cause trouble for you. If the theater people find out, they might make things even harder for your career." "Marcus, after what happened yesterday, I have nothing left to lose, and maybe this is exactly what I need to do. Stop trying to fit into a world that doesn't want me and start creating my own space." Over the next few days, Abigail quietly told a few conservatory classmates about the compositions she had discovered. Most showed genuine interest, especially when she played some of the pieces during breaks. Nathan Miller, a 24-year-old cellist who had always been supportive of Abigail, was the first to accept the invitation. "Man, this music is incredible," he said, after hearing Abigail play "Longing from Across the Sea." "Where did you find this?" "It's a long story." "But Nathan, would you be up for playing at an informal performance? It would be in a bit of an unconventional space." "Of course. As long as it's about making real music, I'm in." Emily Cooper, a 23-year-old violinist from a humble family in Kentucky, also showed immediate interest. "Abigail, this music gives me chills," she said. "It's like every note has its own soul. Who's the composer?" "An incredible woman who never got the chance she deserved. Want to help give her that chance, even if it's late?" "Absolutely." Within a week, Abigail had gathered a group of 6 musicians from the conservatory. Besides Nathan and Emily, she also convinced Christopher Walker, a flutist, Olivia, a violinist, Daniel, a cellist, and Sarah, a lyric soprano. All were talented students who, like Abigail, came from working-class families and had faced hardships staying in the world of classical music. "Everyone," Abigail said during a meeting in her student dorm, "I need to be honest about the performance space. It's a place that technically still belongs to the Metropolitan Opera House, but it's not officially used." "So it's kind of underground?" Nathan asked with a mischievous smile. "More or less, are you all still in?" They unanimously agreed. That Thursday, Abigail took the group to see the basement. Marcus Johnson waited for them with the same kindness he'd shown that first night. "Everyone, this is Marcus Johnson," Abigail introduced. "He's the one preserving this place, and he's the grandson of the composer whose works we'll be playing." The group's reaction was immediate. They were all struck by the beauty of the abandoned space and the story Marcus shared about his grandmother. "My goodness," Emily said, running her fingers over the carved wooden walls. "This place is a hidden treasure." "And the compositions," Christopher added, after examining some sheet music, "are technically astounding. How was this forgotten for so long?" Marcus explained the prejudices of the time and how his grandmother had been systematically excluded from official music circles. "Let's change that," Daniel said firmly. "Let's give her the concert she never had." For 2 weeks, the group rehearsed in the basement every night. Marcus watched the rehearsals in awe, seeing his grandmother's compositions come to life through the instruments of these young musicians. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Ruby Williams' compositions proved even more beautiful when performed by a full ensemble. The blend of piano, strings, flute and voice created unique sonic textures none of the musicians had experienced before. "Marcus," Abigail said after a particularly moving rehearsal, "your grandmother was a genius. These arrangements are too sophisticated for someone self-taught." She may have been self-taught on piano, but she studied music theory from books she borrowed at the library. She spent hours copying sheet music from famous composers to understand how they built their pieces. Word about the basement rehearsals began to spread quietly among the conservatory students. Some professors grew curious too, especially after Margaret Thompson mentioned her memories of Ruby Williams to a few colleagues. "Abigail," Professor Margaret said after class, "I heard you found compositions by Ruby. Is it true?" Abigail confirmed, and Margaret asked to see them. "Are these the original scores?" Margaret asked, carefully examining the manuscripts. "They are. Her grandson kept them all these years." "My word, Abigail, this is a cultural treasure. These compositions should be archived, studied, and performed professionally." "That's exactly what we hoped you'd say, Professor. We want to organize a performance." Margaret Thompson grew thoughtful for a moment. "Where have you been rehearsing?" Abigail Peterson told her about the basement of the theater, and Margaret grew even more intrigued. "I'd love to attend a rehearsal if you'll allow me." "Of course, Professor. It would be an honor." The following evening, Margaret Thompson descended the basement stairs with Abigail by her side. Marcus Johnson greeted her warmly, and she was immediately moved as she recognized the space. "My goodness, it's exactly as I remember," she said, gazing at the stage and piano. "So many wonderful nights I spent here when I was young." During the rehearsal, Margaret remained silent, absorbing every note of Ruby Williams' compositions. When the group finished playing Longing from Across the Sea, tears welled in her eyes. "Marcus," she said, "your grandmother was extraordinary. I remember her playing this very piece nearly 50 years ago, but hearing it now with full arrangements is an entirely different experience." "You actually saw her perform?" "Many times. I was 20, just starting my career as a teacher. I came here whenever I could because this was where I heard real music. No pretenses, no elitism. Margaret turned to the group of young musicians. You need to understand that what you're doing is deeply important. These compositions aren't just beautiful, they're historically significant. They document an era and a perspective that were deliberately erased from our musical history. Her enthusiasm spread through the group. Professor, Emily Cooper asked, do you think more people would be interested in listening? I'm certain of it, but you must be careful. The classical music world still carries many prejudices, and some may not appreciate seeing this space being used again. What kind of trouble do you mean? Abigail asked. Political, mostly. The Metropolitan Opera House has an administration that values maintaining the status quo over artistic innovation. If they find out you're holding unauthorized performances, they could cause problems. Marcus looked concerned. Margaret, do you think we should stop? On the contrary, I think you should keep going, but you must be smart. Perhaps it's time to make this official. How so? You have a historical and cultural treasure here, being revived by talented young artists. This is exactly the kind of project that deserves institutional support, not secrecy. Margaret suggested they document everything: the compositions, the history of the community music hall, the restoration of the space, the rehearsals. With enough material, they could present a formal proposal to the theater's administration. But what if they refuse? Nathan Miller asked. Then at least we'll have tried the proper channels. And if they refuse for unjust reasons, we'll have grounds to challenge the decision. Her suggestion energized the group. In the weeks that followed, alongside rehearsals, they began meticulously documenting every aspect of the project. Nathan, who studied journalism in his free time, took charge of interviews and video recordings. Emily, who had a talent for photography, captured the space and rehearsals. Marcus contributed all the historical information he had about his grandmother and the community music hall. Not just sheet music, but old photographs, performance programs, and even newspaper reviews from the time. Look at this, he said, showing a newspaper clipping from 1973, a glowing review of my grandmother's performance. Abigail read aloud. Composer Ruby Williams presented a work of rare sensitivity yesterday at the Community Music Hall, blending African and European musical traditions in an innovative way. Though not yet recognized by official classical music circles, her contribution to our city's cultural diversity is invaluable. See, said Margaret. Even back then, there were people who recognized the value of her work. As they documented the project, the group continued rehearsing and refining the compositions. The musical quality improved each week, and some of the arrangements they created for Ruby's works became truly spectacular. Sarah, the opera singer, discovered that some of the compositions had lyrics written by Ruby in English and patois, the African language she spoke. Marcus, did your grandmother write lyrics for these songs? Asked Sarah. Some, yes. She said certain emotions could only be expressed with words. Sarah studied the lyrics and began incorporating them into performances. The result was deeply moving, especially when she sang the verses in patois, connecting the music directly to Ruby's African roots. A month after Abigail and Marcus first met, the group was ready for their first formal performance. They decided to invite a small, select audience, a few conservatory professors, music students, and neighborhood residents Marcus had known for years. Everyone, Abigail said the night before the performance, tomorrow isn't just about music. It's about justice, about giving voice to those who were silenced, about showing that true art has no color, social class, or last name. The first performance took place on a Friday evening. About 40 people descended the stairs to the basement, most seeing the space for the first time in decades. Among the audience was Mrs. Dorothy, a 72-year-old woman who had lived in the area since childhood and vaguely remembered the community music hall's performances. Young man, she said to Marcus before the show began, I knew your grandmother. She gave me piano lessons when I was a girl. I've never forgotten her patience. Marcus was moved. He hadn't known his grandmother had given private lessons. Do you remember her playing? Like it was yesterday. She played with a passion I've never seen in anyone else. She said every song was a conversation with her ancestors. When the performance began, The atmosphere in the basement transformed. Ruby's compositions came to life through the young musicians' instruments, and the audience remained in respectful silence from start to finish. The closing piece was Longing from Across the Sea, performed by Abigail on piano with Sarah singing the verses in patois and English. When the final note faded, there was a moment of complete silence before applause erupted. Mrs. Dorothy wept openly. "It's exactly how she played," she said between sobs. "Ruby was with us tonight." After the performance, several people approached Marcus to share memories of his grandmother or express admiration for the project. "You must keep this going," said a 60-year-old man who had been a friend of the Williams family. "Ruby deserves to be remembered." Margaret Thompson was radiant. "That was extraordinary. You didn't just recover the compositions, you recovered the soul of this place." But not all reactions were positive. The following week, Abigail heard rumors that someone had reported their basement activities to the theater's administration. "Abigail," said Nathan on Tuesday, "I think we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "I saw conductor Richard Harrington talking to someone from the theater's legal department. They were discussing unauthorized activities and trespassing." Abigail Peterson's heart raced. After all the dedication they had poured into the project, the idea of being stopped from continuing was devastating. "Are you sure they were talking about us?" "I can't prove it, but it was right after some students commented on our performance. I think someone took the information to him." Abigail sought out Marcus Johnson that same evening. "Marcus, I think they found out about the basement." He took the news more calmly than she expected. "I was already expecting this to happen. It was only a matter of time." "What are we going to do?" "First, we'll confirm if there's really a problem. Then, we'll prepare to defend our right to be here." "Do we even have that right?" "Abigail, this space is public property. It was built with public money, to serve the public. If anyone has the right to question its use, it's us, not them." The next day, confirmation came through Margaret Thompson. "Kids," she said with a serious expression, "I got a call from the theater's administration. They want a meeting with you to discuss unauthorized activities in the building's basement." "When?" Abigail asked. "Tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon, in the director's office." The group gathered that night to prepare for the meeting. Marcus brought all the documents he had about the history of the community music hall and his family's right to the space. "Everyone," Margaret said, "you haven't done anything wrong. You're restoring an abandoned historic space and performing quality music. Don't let them intimidate you." "But what if they forbid us from continuing?" Emily Cooper asked. "Then we go to the press," Nathan Miller replied. "I have contacts in the student press and the city's cultural movement. This story will interest a lot of people." "And if that's not enough," Christopher Walker insisted. "Then we go to court," Marcus said firmly. "My grandmother was silenced once. I won't let that happen again." The meeting in the theater's administration was tense from the start. Present were the administrative director, Mr. Gregory Harrison, conductor Richard Harrington, a legal representative, Abigail, Marcus, Nathan, Emily, and Margaret Thompson. "Gentlemen," the director began, "we've been informed that you've been conducting unauthorized activities in a restricted area of the building. This constitutes trespassing and misuse of public property." "With all due respect," Marcus replied calmly, "I'd like to know the legal basis for this accusation. I've been a city employee for 15 years and have authorization to access all areas of the building for maintenance purposes." The legal representative checked some papers. "The access authorization doesn't include hosting events or artistic performances, but it doesn't prohibit them either," Margaret interjected. "And I'd like to remind you that the space in question is the old community music hall, which operated officially for over 50 years. Conductor Richard Harrington spoke for the first time. "The issue isn't legality, it's suitability. This theater has a standard of quality and prestige to uphold. We can't allow amateur performances in any part of the building." "Amateur?" Abigail couldn't hold back. "Are you saying our music is amateur because we don't have important last names?" "It's not about last names, Miss Peterson. It's about protocols, proper procedures, maintaining institutional seriousness." "Institutional seriousness," Nathan repeated. is letting a historic space sit abandoned for decades while rejecting talented artists out of prejudice. The tension in the room grew noticeably. "I suggest we keep this conversation civil," the director said. "The fact is, you used a space without prior authorization. This needs to be rectified." "We're willing to rectify it," Marcus said. "We've submitted a formal proposal to use the community music hall officially," said the director. "What kind of proposal?" Helena took the floor. "A historical and cultural restoration project. These young people have discovered and are performing original compositions by Ruby Williams, an important composer who was unjustly forgotten. They're also restoring a historic space that's been abandoned for decades." "And who is this Ruby Williams?" asked conductor Richard Harrington with barely concealed disdain. Marcus Johnson took a deep breath before answering. "My grandmother, a composer who performed on that stage for 15 years and was systematically excluded from the city's official music circles because she was a woman, black, and an immigrant." "Ah, I see," said the conductor. "So it's a personal matter, not an artistic one." "On the contrary," Helena interjected firmly, "it's deeply artistic. Ruby Williams's compositions are of exceptional quality and represent an important contribution to American music that was unjustly ignored." The director seemed impatient with the discussion. "Let's stick to practical matters. You've used the space without authorization. That can't continue. If you want to use the community music hall, you must submit a formal request through the proper channels." "What channels are those?" asked Abigail. "First, you need to present a detailed proposal to the hall's Cultural Programming Committee. Then, the project must be approved by the Administrative Board. Finally, there are safety concerns, permits, insurance." "How long does this process take?" Marcus asked. "Between 6 months and 2 years, depending on the project's complexity." 2 years? Abigail couldn't hide her outrage. To use a space that's been abandoned for decades. These are standard procedures for any use of the building. "So, in the meantime, we're banned from continuing?" Emily Cooper asked. "Exactly. Until formal authorization is granted, any activity in the basement is prohibited." The group left the meeting disheartened and angry. 2 hours of bureaucracy had undone months of dedicated work. "We can't accept this," Nathan said, as they walked through the historic district. "They're clearly throwing up bureaucratic roadblocks to stop us." "Nathan's right," Marcus agreed. 2 years of paperwork to use an abandoned space? It's an excuse to bury the project. "So what now?" Abigail asked, feeling defeated again. Helena, who had been thoughtful since the meeting, finally spoke up. "Now we do what we should have done from the start. Take this story public." "How so?" "Abigail, you have something very powerful in your hands. A real story of historical injustice being corrected by talented young artists. The press will love it. But if we make noise in the media, won't they come after us even harder?" "Quite the opposite. The more exposure this gets, the harder it'll be for them to maintain an indefensible position." "What will they say publicly? That they're against restoring historical heritage, that they don't want to perform quality music, that they prefer keeping spaces abandoned?" Helena's strategy made sense, but it still frightened Abigail. "Professor, won't this hurt our careers? If we're labeled as troublemakers?" "Abigail, dear, you're already labeled. Conductor Richard Harrington made it very clear at the audition that you're not welcome in his world. Now you have the chance to create your own." Over the weekend, the group met to plan how to take the story public. Nathan used his student movement contacts and secured interest from a cultural journalist at a major city newspaper. "The guy's name is Michael Anderson," Nathan explained. "She's been working in the culture section for 10 years and has a reputation for supporting independent artists. She wants to meet with you on Monday." Marcus was anxious, but determined. "I'll gather all the old photographs of my grandmother, the performance programs, everything that can prove the historical importance of the community music hall. And I'll prepare recordings of the compositions we've performed," said Abigail. "People need to hear the music to understand why it's so special." Emily was tasked with organizing all the photos she had taken of the space and the rehearsals, documenting the process of restoring the basement. The interview with Michael took place at a downtown cafe, in a casual setting that put everyone at ease. "Tell me everything from the beginning," said the journalist, turning on his recorder. For 2 hours, Abigail, Marcus, and Margaret recounted the whole story. The failed audition, the meeting in the theater alley, the discovery of the abandoned basement, the forgotten compositions of Ruby Williams, the rehearsals, the first performance, and finally, the hostile meeting with the theater's management. Michael asked precise questions and showed knowledge about the classical music scene in the city. "This story about Ruby Williams is fascinating," he said. "Do you have documentation proving she really existed and composed these pieces?" Marcus showed the old photographs, the performance programs, and even a newspaper review from 1973. "And the musical quality of the compositions?" Michael asked Margaret. "They're extraordinary. Ruby Williams had exceptional talent and a unique musical vision. Her compositions deserve to be studied in conservatories and performed by professional orchestras." "Why do you think she was forgotten?" "For the same reasons Abigail was rejected in last week's audition," Marcus replied. "Racial, social, and gender bias. Ruby never had a chance because she wasn't born in the right place." Michael seemed especially interested in the meeting with the theater's management. "They really said the approval process could take 2 years. "They did," Abigail confirmed, "for a space that's been abandoned for decades and is public property. And what's their justification for all that bureaucracy?" "Protocols, procedures, maintaining institutional prestige," Margaret answered with irony. "The same excuse is always used to exclude artists who aren't part of the elite." Michael ended the interview by asking to hear recordings of Ruby's compositions. When Abigail played Longing from Across the Sea on her phone, the journalist was visibly moved. "This is truly special. When the article is published, I'll suggest the paper includes an online audio clip for readers to listen to." The story ran on Thursday, taking up a full page in the culture section with the headline, "Young musicians discover forgotten composer and face bias to perform her works." The article told the whole story compellingly, including details about Ruby Williams's life, the quality of her compositions, the neglect of the community music hall, and the bureaucratic hurdles the group faced. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Margaret's phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from musicians, teachers, journalists, and ordinary people moved by the story. "Margaret," said a fellow professor from the conservatory, "I read the article about you. Is it true these compositions are as good as the journalist described?" "They're better," she replied. "You need to hear them for yourself." Nathan received messages from cultural activists, music students from other cities, and even a documentary filmmaker who wanted to capture the story on film. Marcus was stopped on the street by neighbors who remembered his grandmother. "Mark," said Mrs. Martha, a woman who had lived in the area for 60 years, "I read about your grandmother in the paper. She helped me when my son was sick back in the 80s. I always knew she was special." But the most significant reaction came from an unexpected source. On Friday, Margaret received a call from Dr. William Roberts, a lawyer specializing in cultural rights. "Professor Margaret, I read the article about the community music hall and would like to offer my services pro bono to help your group." "What kind of help?" "Legal. What the theater administration is doing is an abuse of power. They can't just ban the use of a public space without proper justification." Margaret immediately called Abigail and Marcus. "We have a lawyer, and he's willing to work for free." The meeting with Dr. William took place on Saturday morning. He was a 50-year-old man passionate about art and music who had read the article and was outraged by the treatment of the group. "First, let's establish the legal facts," he said, organizing papers on the table. "The community music hall is public property. It was built with public funds and must serve the public interest. The current administration can't just decide to keep part of the building unused indefinitely." "But they didn't say it's unused," Abigail argued. "They said there are procedures to follow." "Procedures that conveniently take 2 years to complete," the lawyer replied. "That's what we call administrative procrastination. It's a way to block access without publicly taking a stand." Marcus showed him all the documents he had about the theater and his grandmother's work. "Marcus, these documents are invaluable. They prove your family has a legitimate historical connection to the space. Your father worked there for 30 years. Your grandmother performed there for 15. You have more right to that place than any bureaucrat. And what can we actually do? Abigail asked. Several things. First, we'll file a formal request for access based on transparency and public information laws. Second, we'll legally challenge the excessive delay in authorization processes. Third, if necessary, we'll go to court. The prospect of legal support energized the whole group. For the first time since the meeting with the theatre's management, they felt they had a real chance to continue the project. Dr. William, Margaret asked, how long could these legal processes take? If we do everything right, a few weeks. The important thing is that while the processes are underway, they can't legally stop you from using the space. How so? Simple. If you've filed formal requests and they don't have a solid legal basis for the ban, the situation reverts to the previous status quo, meaning you can keep using the community music hall while waiting for official decisions. Marcus smiled for the first time in days. Does that mean we can start rehearsing again? Technically, yes, but I'd recommend being more strategic. How about organizing a public performance at the community music hall? Something big that clearly demonstrates the cultural value of your project. Abigail loved the idea. Big how? Invite the press, professional musicians, cultural critics, politicians, anyone influential who could support your cause. Make it impossible to ignore the quality of your work. Over the weekend, the group planned what they decided to call the tribute concert to Ruby Williams. It would be a formal performance of the discovered compositions with the highest musical quality they could achieve. Margaret used her connections in the music world to invite professional musicians interested in participating. Nathan organized the promotion through social media and press contacts. Emily Cooper took charge of the visual production and photography for the event. Marcus, motivated by the possibility of finally seeing his grandmother publicly recognized, dedicated himself to preparing an exhibition with photographs, documents, and personal belongings of Ruby Williams. Abigail focused on the musical preparation, studying and refining the interpretations of the most complex compositions. The concert date was set for the following Saturday. Through social media and word of mouth, over 200 people confirmed their attendance. Folks, Nathan said on Tuesday, we have a logistical problem. The basement of the theater can't safely hold 200 people. What now? Asked Emily. Margaret had an idea. What if we held it in the theater's inner courtyard? It's outdoors, fits many more people, and technically still part of the complex. But it's even more visible. The administration will definitely try to stop us. Leave it to me, said Dr. William. I'll submit a formal request to use the courtyard. If they deny it without proper justification, we'll have another legal argument. As expected, the theater administration denied the request, citing safety concerns and lack of infrastructure. Perfect, the lawyer said when he received the refusal. Now they've dug themselves deeper. Denying the use of a public space for a legitimate cultural event without proper technical justification is an abuse of power. How does that help us? Abigail asked. We still don't have a place to hold the concert. Oh, we do. We'll hold it in the original location, the community music hall in the basement. But this time we'll do it completely officially and transparently. What do you mean, officially? I'll file for a court injunction guaranteeing your right to use the space while the administrative process unfolds. And I'll invite the press, public officials, and any authorities interested in observing. The strategy was risky, but Marcus immediately supported it. Dr. William, do it. My grandmother was silenced for too long. It's time for her to be heard. The injunction was granted on Thursday, 2 days before the concert. The judge ruled that, pending a final decision on the use of the community music hall, the group had the right to hold cultural performances in the space, provided basic safety regulations were followed. News of the injunction spread quickly, and the concert gained even more visibility. TV journalists, music critics, and even some politicians confirmed their attendance. Conductor Richard Harrington made one last attempt, telling the press that the theater would not be responsible for safety issues or the artistic quality of unauthorized events. That's the dumbest statement he could have made, Dr. William remarked. He's publicly admitting he'd rather sabotage a cultural event than support it. On Friday, the day before the concert, The group made final preparations at the community music hall. Volunteers helped clean and organize the space, technicians set up a basic sound system, and Marcus arranged his exhibition about Ruby Williams' life. Abigail rehearsed one last time on the old piano, now tuned by a technician who volunteered after reading about the project. "Everyone," she said to the group gathered on stage, "tomorrow isn't just a concert. It's a chance to show that real music doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. And it's my grandmother's chance to finally get the recognition she deserved," Marcus added, moved. The tribute concert for Ruby Williams took place on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Over 300 people descended the stairs to the community music hall, including professional musicians, students, teachers, journalists, neighborhood residents, and even some staff from the Metropolitan Opera House who discreetly supported the project. The performance began with Abigail playing alone on the piano, Longing from Across the Sea, the same composition she had discovered on her first night in the basement. The respectful silence of the audience showed that everyone understood they were witnessing something special. Next, the group performed a selection of 8 compositions by Ruby Williams, each revealing different facets of the composer's talent. Sarah sang in patois and English, moving especially the descendants of African immigrants in the crowd. During the intermission, Marcus spoke about his grandmother's life, showing photographs and sharing stories many were hearing for the first time. Ruby Williams arrived in the United States in 1948, just 16 years old, he told the attentive audience. She didn't speak English, knew no one, and had no money, but she brought with her something no one could take away, her musical talent. He spoke of the hardships she faced, her determination to learn piano, her early compositions, and the years she performed on that very stage for an audience that welcomed her without prejudice. For 15 years, from 1963 to 1978, my grandmother found in this theater the family she never had, the recognition denied to her uptown, and the freedom to create without fear of judgment. When he finished speaking, an 80-year-old woman stood up in the audience. "May I say something?" she asked. "Of course," Marcus replied. "I'm Faith Johnson. I knew Ruby in the 70s. She taught me piano when I was young and couldn't afford lessons. She never charged a dime, saying music was a gift meant to be shared." The woman's voice trembled with emotion. "Ruby saved me. I was going through a very hard time in my life, and her music gave me the strength to carry on. I know she did the same for many others." Other audience members began sharing their own memories of Ruby Williams. One man recounted how she had played at his wedding for free. A woman said Ruby had organized benefit concerts to help struggling families in the neighborhood. Marcus openly wept, learning new aspects of his grandmother's life he had never known. The second part of the concert was even more moving. The group performed Ruby's most complex compositions, including a piece for piano and string quartet that showcased her technical sophistication. The performance ended with the entire audience singing along to a simple song Ruby had composed to teach the neighborhood children. When the final chords faded, the ovation was long and heartfelt. People hugged, cried, and many approached the stage to congratulate the musicians. Among the crowd was Michael Anderson, the journalist who had written the first article about the project. "Marcus," he said, "I need to write about this. What happened here today was far more than a concert. It was an act of historical justice." A music critic from a major newspaper approached Abigail. "Miss, your interpretations were exceptional, and these compositions, they rival the great names of American music. How was this woman forgotten for so long?" "For the same reasons that almost made me give up music," Abigail replied. "Prejudice, elitism, and the idea that talent only matters when it comes with the right last name." Margaret Thompson was radiant, chatting with fellow teachers who had attended. "Margaret," said a professor from another conservatory, "you've created something incredible here. These compositions should be part of any music school's curriculum." "That's exactly what we hoped you'd say," Margaret replied. "We want Ruby Williams's work to be studied, performed, and recognized as an important part of our musical history." Dr. William Roberts observed everything with professional satisfaction. "You know you've won, don't you?" he said to the group. "After today, it'll be politically impossible for any authority to argue against the value of this project." And he was right. The following Monday, Newspapers across the city ran stories about the concert, with headlines like "Forgotten Composer Moves Audience in Historic Performance" and "Young Musicians Prove Talent Knows No Social Class." The impact was nationwide. TV programs requested interviews, universities invited the group for performances, and music publishers expressed interest in printing Ruby Williams compositions. Most importantly, public pressure forced the Metropolitan Opera House's administration to reconsider its stance. On Wednesday, Margaret received an unexpected call from the administrative director himself. "Professor Margaret, we'd like to speak with you again about the Community Music Hall project." "What kind of conversation?" "A conversation about how we can officially support the work you're developing." The second meeting at the Opera House's offices had a completely different tone from the first. The same people were present, but the dynamic had changed drastically. After reviewing the situation further, the director said, "We recognize that your project has significant cultural merit and deserves institutional support." Conductor Richard Harrington remained silent, clearly uncomfortable with the shift in position. "What kind of support?" Abigail asked, still wary. "We're preparing a proposal to turn the Community Music Hall into an official venue for alternative performances, with its own programming and designated budget." Marcus couldn't hide his surprise. "You're serious?" "Completely. And we'd like your group to be the artistic curators of this new space." Margaret smiled. "How long would implementation take?" 3 months. "We need to address safety and infrastructure issues, but nothing that's a real obstacle." "And during those 3 months," Nathan asked, "you can continue using the space as usual as long as you coordinate performances with us for scheduling and safety reasons." Dr. Roberts, who was attending the meeting, asked technical questions about the proposal's legal and administrative aspects. Everything seemed legitimate. "There's one condition," the director said, as they neared an agreement. "What?" Abigail asked, tense. "We want the first official performance at the new Community Music Hall to be a concert honoring Ruby Williams, performed by the New York Philharmonic." The room fell completely silent. No one had expected such a bold proposal. "The Philharmonic?" Marcus repeated, incredulous. "Yes. We want your grandmother's compositions performed by the city's official orchestra at the main theater with a televised broadcast." Abigail looked at Conductor Harrington, who finally spoke up. "I apologize for my earlier behavior," he said, clearly embarrassed. "I recognize that my actions were motivated by prejudices that have no place in art. Ruby Williams' compositions are extraordinary and deserve to be performed by the city's finest orchestra." "You're serious?" Abigail asked, still processing the radical change in attitude. "Completely serious. I've studied the scores, listened to recordings of the concert, and spoken with musicians who were there. It's music of exceptional quality." Marcus was visibly moved. "My grandmother performed by the Philharmonic." "Not just performed," said the director. "Celebrated. We want this to be an event that marks the beginning of a new era for the Metropolitan Opera House, where talent matters more than social background." Margaret Thompson spoke up. "Gentlemen, this is a very positive change, but we want assurances that it's not just a marketing strategy. How do we know you're truly committed to this new philosophy?" "Beyond the symphonic concert and the official recognition of the Community Music Hall," the director replied, "we're creating a scholarship program for young talents from low-income families." "Abigail will be the first recipient," Abigail gasped. "What do you mean, scholarship?" "Full payment for your graduate studies at the conservatory, plus a monthly stipend for living expenses, and a guaranteed spot in the New York Philharmonic once you complete your studies." It was the exact opposite of what had happened at the audition just weeks before. "Why this change?" she asked. "What really happened?" The director sighed. "Abigail, the truth is, the impact of your project showed the theater's administration that we were on the wrong side of history. We received hundreds of calls, emails, and letters, people questioning why we keep spaces abandoned, why we reject talented artists, why we don't support important cultural projects. And some major donors threatened to withdraw their contributions if we didn't change our stance," added the legal representative. "So you changed because of external pressure," said Dr. William Roberts. "Yes, but also because we recognized it was time for change. The world of classical music needs to be more inclusive, more representative, more connected to the community." Abigail looked at her companions. They all seemed to still be processing the surreal offer. "Can we have some time to talk among ourselves?" she asked. "Of course, but we'd like an answer by Friday so we can start preparations." Outside the theater, the group gathered to discuss the proposal. "Guys, is this real?" asked Emily Cooper. "Are they offering everything we dreamed of?" "It seems too good to be true," said Nathan. "Could it be a trap?" Marcus Johnson was thoughtful. "I don't know if it's a trap, but I know it's justice. My grandmother deserves to be performed by the symphony." Margaret was pragmatic. "From a legal and practical standpoint, the proposal is solid, and even if it weren't, you all have enough support now to continue the project regardless." "Abigail," said Dr. William Roberts, "the decision is yours. You're the one who took the biggest risks, who suffered the most. What is your heart telling you?" Abigail thought for a long moment. "My heart is telling me that Ruby Williams waited 50 years for this opportunity. I can't make her wait any longer. So, we accept. We accept, but with conditions." "What conditions?" "First, the scholarship program can't be just for me. It has to include others like Nathan, Emily, Christopher. Second, the community music hall can't just be a side project. It needs its own budget and regular programming. Third, Ruby Williams' compositions must be officially published and made available to other orchestras and conservatories. And fourth," added Marcus, "I want my grandmother officially recognized as a cultural treasure of the city, with a plaque, an official biography, everything they denied her in life." "Then let's make history," Margaret said with a smile. The positive response was delivered on Friday, along with the group's list of conditions. To everyone's surprise, the theater's administration accepted all demands without resistance. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of intense work. While the community music hall was being renovated and properly equipped, Abigail and the group worked with the symphony orchestra, preparing Ruby Williams' compositions for performance with full instrumentation. Conductor Richard Harrington, determined to make up for his previous attitude, personally dedicated himself to the arrangements, constantly consulting Marcus about his grandmother's musical intentions. "Marcus," he said during a rehearsal, "your grandmother was truly visionary. These harmonies she created were decades ahead of their time." The press followed the entire preparation process, and the symphonic concert honoring Ruby Williams became one of the city's most anticipated cultural events of the year. Tickets for the performance sold out within hours. Television networks across the country requested broadcasting rights. International music critics announced they would attend the event, specially. A week before the concert, Marcus made a discovery that moved everyone. While sorting through his grandmother's personal papers, he found a letter she had written but never sent, dated 1994, a year before her passing. "To whoever may one day play my music," the letter read, "I hope you find in it what I always tried to convey: love, hope, and the certainty that music knows no borders. If you are reading this, it means my dreams did not die with me. Thank you for letting me sing again." The letter was read by Marcus during the concert, moments before the symphony orchestra performed "Longing from Across the Sea" for an audience of 2,000 people and millions of viewers. When the first notes sounded, many in the audience began to cry. Ruby Williams' music, finally performed with the grandeur it deserved, proved even more powerful than anyone had imagined. Abigail, who closed the concert by playing alone on the piano, a composition Ruby had dedicated to future generations of musicians, felt a deep connection with the woman who had created that art 50 years earlier. At the end of the concert, the ovation lasted 15 minutes. Marcus took the stage and, holding a portrait of his grandmother, simply said, "Grandma, we did it." The concert was hailed by critics as a landmark in American music. Ruby Williams' compositions were compared to those of great national and international masters. More important than the critical acclaim was the project's social impact. In the weeks following the concert, conservatories across the country established scholarship programs for low-income students. Community music halls in other cities began searching their own archives for forgotten artists. The Community Music Hall officially reopened 3 months later, with Marcus as artistic director and Abigail as music curator. The space began hosting weekly performances by independent artists, young talents, and experimental cultural projects. Abigail completed her postgraduate studies with a thesis on music and social inclusion, The Case of Ruby Williams. She became the youngest professor at the conservatory and later the first person of humble origins to officially join the New York Philharmonic. Nathan founded a cultural production company specializing in promoting independent artists. Emily became the official photographer of the Community Music Hall and documented dozens of similar projects in other cities. Christopher created a free music school in the neighborhood where Marcus lived. 5 years after that night in the theater alley, Abigail stood on the main stage of the Metropolitan Opera House, conducting the symphony orchestra in a performance of her own composition, which she had dedicated to Ruby Williams' memory. In the audience, Marcus watched with emotion, alongside Margaret Thompson and Dr. William Roberts, who had become close friends of the family. By her side was also Mrs. Faith Johnson, the woman who had known Ruby Williams and who had become a sort of adoptive grandmother to Abigail. After the performance, Abigail went down to the Community Music Hall, where she found a group of children from the free music school Christopher Walker had created. They were rehearsing one of Ruby Williams's simplest compositions. "Professor Abigail," said an 8-year-old girl, "is it true the composer was just like us?" "Just like you?" "How so?" "Poor. That no one believed she knew music." Abigail knelt to be at the child's eye level. "It's true. She was exactly like you. And do you know what that means?" "What?" "That you can go wherever you want in life. Talent doesn't have a social class, a color, or a last name. It only takes dedication and love for music." As the children returned to their rehearsal, Abigail stepped onto the small stage where it had all begun and sat at the old piano, now fully restored. She gently played Longing from Across the Sea, the piece she had discovered that first night in the basement. But now, instead of sadness, she felt deep gratitude. Gratitude toward Marcus, who had taken the risk of showing a stranger the treasure he kept. Gratitude toward Margaret, who had believed in the project from the start. Gratitude toward all the young musicians who had agreed to embark on an uncertain adventure. And especially gratitude toward Ruby Williams, a woman who had faced every imaginable prejudice but never given up on her art, leaving behind a legacy of beauty and resilience for future generations. When she finished playing, Abigail realized she wasn't alone. Marcus had quietly come down and was watching from the audience. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you," he replied, "for bringing my grandmother's dreams to life." "Do you think she would be proud?" Marcus smiled, looking at the portrait of Ruby Williams that now permanently adorned the theater wall. "I'm sure of it. She always said music was like a river. It starts small but always finds its way to the sea." And so, in a small theater that had been forgotten for decades, two people who should never have met proved that sometimes the most impossible dreams are the only ones worth chasing. End of story. Now tell us, what did you think of this story of perseverance and recognition? Do you believe Abigail and Marcus made the right decisions? Share your honest thoughts in the comments. Could there be other forgotten talents waiting for a second chance? We'd love to hear your reflections. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other inspiring stories.